Hi, I'm Dr. Denise O'Neil Green, and I'm the editor for Institutional Diversity blog. And today is actually November the 9th, the day after the U.S. elections, and Donald Trump is now president-elect. So it turns out that since the election, the Canadian and immigration website has actually shut down because of all the different inquiries that have come through. And I've been living in Canada since 2012. And I thought this might be a good time for me just to share a little bit about my experiences living in Canada. So here it goes. What has it been like for me to live in Canada as an expat? Well, I primarily have lived in the United States in the Midwest, and I moved around quite a bit. So my family and I got pretty good at moving from place to place and adjusting. But when I came to Canada, I actually did go through quite an adjustment. First of all, I didn't even realize my status as an American would even be all that important. But as I was in the grocery store, in a bank, whatever setting it was, people would ask me, "So, are you from down south?" Now, down south is what they call the United States and Canada. And people would say, from your accent, I could tell that you're American. I never even thought I had an accent, by the way, but now I do. And clearly, living in Canada as an American is pretty interesting to hear how people talk about America. Because you see, in Canada, oftentimes they compare themselves to America, the United States, but many times they don't want to be compared to the United States. And they see themselves as much more polite, much more civil, that people in America are much more direct, rude, and arrogant. I'm not going to speak to that point, but it's pretty clear that there are certain perceptions about what an American is and what a Canadian is. So when I think about just being in Canada, of course, I had to get used to different types of brands, different types of foods, moving to a big city and being in Toronto. I think is really great. But also, there are some other things that are quite different. Speaking of elections, the elections are the same across the entire country. It isn't driven by each province as it is in the United States, having it being determined from state to state how elections are run, but it is nationwide the way elections are run. Also, there's gun control, and as many of us know, there's more or less universal health care. So, what has it been like for me to be an African American expat living in Canada? You know, I live in Toronto, which is considered one of the most diverse cities, if not the most diverse city in the world. But when I got here, I realized that there aren't really a lot of African American people who live in Toronto, let alone Canada. I could probably count on one hand how many African Americans I've run into since living here the past 4.5 years or so. It turns out that there's absolutely a greater number of Black folks who live in the States. There are much fewer who live in Canada. However, there's a very high concentration in particular urban areas, including Toronto. So, Blacks who live here tend to be Black Canadians or Black Canadians who originate from Africa, various countries in Africa, or who come from the Caribbean, or even who come from the UK. So there's quite a bit of diversity, and there is not necessarily as much of a sense of a collective history as there is in the States with slavery, Jim Crow, segregation, civil rights movement, etc., etc. However, slavery did exist in Canada, even though you have a lot of Canadians who don't know that slavery actually did exist in Canada. No, people didn't just leave slavery from the States, come through the Underground Railroad, and come up north and settle here in Canada. Slavery actually existed here. And in the province that I live in, Ontario, that was the first province that actually abolished slavery. Also, just as an interesting note, there aren't a lot of soul food restaurants here, even though it is considered one of the most diverse cities in the world. Many of the so-called soul food restaurants are a fusion of Caribbean or South Asian food, so you don't quite get that down-home soul food cooking that you might expect. And then I guess lastly, you still run into the problem of where do I go to get my hair done? Where do I go to find the kind of foods I want? Or where do I go to find stockings or clothes that fit my particular body type? So being an African American in Canada is a very interesting experience, I would say, and I would welcome anyone to actually come and check out Toronto because of its great diversity. So, being African American in Canada, what I found very interesting was that Black History Month is also celebrated here in the same way it's celebrated in the States. And because of Black History Month in the States, it was established here in Canada. The Black National Anthem is the same. Actually, those who are cited as contributing to history, oftentimes they cite African Americans, but also Canadians. So it's really great to have that kind of feeling that there is, as I might not have expected, there is a sense of a uniform history and collective experience. But also, racism is very much a part of Canadian society, even though they don't talk about race or racism nearly as much as it's done in the States. However, it's here, but it's different. And it's different in a way that manifests itself through the customs and cultures of Canadian society. And I guess that's something I can talk to you about at a later date. So, what has it been like for me to live as an African American woman expat in Canada? So, when I arrived and started in my role at Ryerson University, I looked around and I noticed that there weren't a lot of Black women leaders in different sectors, including higher education. And there was an interesting thing that occurred. A number of Black women who I connected with actually invited me into their circle and shared with me their experiences of being a Black woman in Canada. And they made very clear to me that the polite nature of Canadian society, not to be fooled by that, but to understand that that's a veneer and to recognize that as a Black woman, you will come into different challenges and face different challenges as a result of that identity. So what was interesting about my recognizing the lack of African American women and sharing that with a few of my colleagues, we actually decided to embark upon a project called the 100 Accomplished Black Canadian Women. And we published a book. We started this project in early 2015, And it came to its conclusion in 2016 with the launch of the book and a gala. And we were able to make visible the contributions of 100 accomplished Black Canadian women, which I'm just very proud of and very happy that I could be a part of that. So, being not only a woman, a Black woman in Canada, you experience some of the same things. There's still a gap in pay. So, you have white women who make less than white men, and you have Black and Indigenous women who make much less than white women. So, that still persists. Then you also have the other kinds of challenges of being promoted or hired into leadership positions. So that continues, even up north in Canada. So while there's absolutely a downside to that, there's an upside. I have a son who has a mobility disability. He uses a wheelchair, and living in Toronto specifically, in Ontario, it's really a wonderful place because it provides accessibility for Ontarians. There's something called the AODA, Accessibility for Ontarians Disabilities Act. And it's a means of providing accessibility across the entire province, in your workplace, within public transportation and public spaces. And so, by example, my son can get around very quickly. It's really great that he can take the bus, he can take the subway, he can get to downtown, he can get to different places in the city. Everything isn't perfect, obviously, but it provides a means for him. And that's a wonderful thing, being a mom with a son who has those type of challenges, daily challenges. So, what advice would I give? The advice I would give at this point is, of course, the election has happened, and many people have talked about moving to Canada. Well, moving to Canada takes time. You have to go through a lot of hoops. And given my experience, I was lucky enough to come here because I was offered a job to come here, and that was my entry point. But overall, I would say if you're interested in coming to Canada, check it out. Figure out what ways you can add value and come here. And certainly, I would say in Canada, in Toronto in particular, diversity is very much welcome, very much a part of the landscape here. And it's really a great city and a place to live. So just know that Canada is not the United States. People are overall very polite and very friendly here. And I feel very fortunate that I've had the opportunity to move to Canada, live and work here. And the greatest thing is that we've been able to provide a legacy for my children as an opportunity for them as young adults to be able to live in another country and establish their lives and have a future that is very promising. So, tell me what you think. Hope you enjoyed the videos and what I've shared. All right.